Chapter 1. What did you call my mother? I grew up in Huntington Beach, California. When you think about that city, certain impressions come to mind, and one of the most popular is surfing in the 60s. White kids surfing, but it wasn't only white kids, even though that's what the Beach Boys would have you believe. Believe it or not, Mexicans surfed too, and fished, and hung out at the beach, and drank beer or smoked a joint with friends if there were no parents around. If you were a Mexican kid growing up in Huntington Beach, this is what you did. My father was Mexican. My mother was Anglo. They liked the water too. I remember my parents this way. My father's name is Samuel Ortiz. He was born in Santa Ana, California in 1944. His family was also originally from Santa Ana, although the Ortiz family did come here from Mexico at some point. Names, dates, and places are hard to remember, but my father would tell me stories when I was younger. He was in the army in the 60s. He ran with local gangs a bit when he was growing up, but mostly he hung out with car clubs like the Night Owls, who would cruise around Santa Ana in their tricked out cars. My father graduated from high school, but he did not go to college. He started out as a carpenter and worked as a contractor before forming his own company. He was a successful craftsman and a great artist. Joyce Robles. He made a lot of the family's clothes. He was a designer, an artist. He was totally outrageous. My mother's name is Joyce Robles. Before that, she was Joyce Johnson. Before that, she was Joyce Simmons. She was born on the island of Hawaii in Hilo in 1948. My father was a missionary. We would travel a lot. Some days we would have these tent services. On other days, we would stand on street corners, swinging our tambourines. We were doing our Pentecostal thing, just trying to bring in the sinners. My mother was the oldest of six sisters. Her father, Herman, served in World War II. Her mother, whom I've only ever referred to as Grandma, died when I was 9 years old. Joyce Robles. My parents would always say that one day we would go to the mainland, which meant California, which meant Long Beach. We moved there in 1965. My mother did not go to high school. Things were tight, money wise, for a family with six kids, so my mother stayed home to take care of her sisters while her parents worked. She did it grudgingly. I remember conversations with my mother where she said that her dad was hard on her when she was growing up. Maybe that's why she married her first husband at such a young age. Joyce Robles. I met Louis Simmons when I was 14 years old. He was a friend of a friend. By the time I was 15, we were a couple. Her first husband's name was Louis Simmons. I met him once, but I don't really know much about him. She was with him for 8 years and had three kids with him, all boys: Jimmy, Mike, and Marty, each born 3 years apart. Joyce Robles. Louie and I got married really young. I was 17 when I had our first son, Jim. We were very loving in the beginning, but when things got tough, he was always wanting to go out to the nightclubs and act crazy. I wouldn't go to the nightclubs because I was a good missionary girl, so I stayed home and tried to be Donna Reed. Louis Simmons was a character and a half. I left him in late 1971 when our third child, Marty, was 11 months old. We divorced in 1972. That's when she found my father, Joyce Robles. After I divorced Louie, I moved in with my sister Shirley and later moved out with a friend of mine to a place in Huntington Beach. One day, I was on an outing with the kids in Newport Beach when I met Tito's father. He saw my little boys and he knew they didn't have a daddy with them, but that didn't seem to bother him. 2 months later, we went on a date, and after that, we were like glue. He was a very handsome man, a mixture of Carlos Santana and Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. My mom and dad's courtship was simply a matter of dad sweeping my mom off her feet. He was a good looking guy, and he was very nice to her. They started going out, and one thing led to another, and they became a couple. They began living together in 1974. They were never married on paper. It was like a common law relationship. They were very loving to each other. My father never cheated on my mother, and he never beat her. In 1974, my father went to prison for 11 months. It went down like this. He and some of his friends were driving to a rock concert. They had some pills and some dime bags of pot in the car. The police pulled them over, took one look at my father with his wild hair and crazy looks, and thought that the weed belonged to him and that he was a diller. The weed wasn't his, and he wasn't dilling, but he was found guilty and did his time. The first house that my parents lived in was this real nice place in Huntington Beach. They stayed there for a while, and then they moved to Santa Ana. My mother got pregnant, and she had a baby boy. They named him Caesar Sebastian Ortiz. They were ready to stop having children at that point, but Caesar died of SIDS when he was 4 months old. Joyce Robles. When Caesar died, we were not thinking about having another child. I was in shock. It was hard to get through the day. For a while, I would go to the cemetery where Caesar was buried, and it would mess me up for weeks afterwards. After a while, I just stopped going. All of a sudden, I got pregnant again. It was like God had sent me an angel. If Caesar had lived, I never would have been born. But after Caesar died, my parents wanted to have a kid together so badly that they tried again. I was born Jacob Christopher Ortiz on January 23rd, 1975. My dad was 6'5", and my mom was 5'7", and I was a very big kid. I weighed 11 pounds, 8 ounces at birth. And by age 1, I weighed 45 pounds. I wasn't fat. I was just this husky kid. When my mom held me, I measured from her kneecaps to the top of her head. My father gave me the nickname of Tito when I was about a year old. Tito translated into tyrant, and it kind of fit because even at age 1, I was a very bold and bratty kid, but it was apparently mostly in a good way. My mom would always tell me that everybody always wanted to be around me and talk to me because I constantly gave off this positive kind of energy. I had a typical relationship with my older brothers. They would beat me up, then turn right around and take care of me. Jim was 11 years older, and he seemed to be the one who would always look out for me. Mike would always tease me and mess with me, and Marty used to beat the shit out of me all the time. As the youngest, it always seemed like somebody was doing something outrageous to me, like the time my brother Mike and I were playing on the roof of the house. He thought it would be funny to tie me to the chimney with duct tape and leave me there. I was scared and started screaming. I must have been up there screaming for 2 hours before my Aunt Linda heard me and came to the rescue. We led a pretty idyllic life. We were living at the beach. My father went to work every day, and my mother was a stay at home mom, taking care of kids. As I got older, my brothers and I would spend a lot of days walking down the alleys behind our house to the beach. I used to go swimming and do a little boogie boarding. We would go lay out in the sand and play like regular kids. Sometimes we'd bring a football, and every once in a while, one of us would throw the football at somebody's stuff while they were in the water. We went to retrieve it. We'd grab people's wallets so we'd have money to buy stuff. I was too young to know that what I was doing was a crime. It just seemed like another fun thing to do. We were always going on family trips. We'd go to Disneyland and places like Casper Park and Lake Elsinore where we did a lot of camping and fishing. We liked being outdoors. One time, we drove up to Pismo Beach, which is up the California coast, in our VW bus. This was when you could still drive your cars on the beach. We went out there, and our van got stuck in the sand, and we ended up waiting there until late at night when a bunch of bikers came by and helped pull us out. Those were the good times. Joyce Robles. The holidays were always special. I remember one year Tito's father spent weeks fixing up the backyard for Halloween. One year, the entire family piled into the car and went to this place where there was this old broken down coffin. We grabbed the coffin for our Halloween party while the kids looked out for the police. There was a very welcoming attitude in our house. All the neighborhood kids hung out there. Tito's father made the kids a tree house. He was always good to my children, but for him, Tito was like his magic child. He truly loved them, even though they were not his biological kids. My father took in my mother's children and basically treated them as his own, and for the most part, my half brothers treated him with respect. There were the arguments, but for the most part, things were settled peacefully, except for the time when my brother Mike, who was always a little crazy anyway, got mad at my father and tried to set him on fire. My dad, who had gotten into it with Mike for some reason, when it was over, my dad went to bed, but Mike was still pissed, so he snuck into my dad's bedroom, splashed some lighter fluid on him, and threw a lit match at him. My dad jumped up and put the fire out before he was seriously burned. Mike got a serious whipping for pulling that stunt. At one time or another, we all acted out and got punished. I remember getting whipped with a belt once because I stole some money from one of my father's friends. Whenever we would get a whipping, it wasn't about abuse. It was about us listening and learning, and I definitely learned not to steal money from my dad's friends. Dad and I used to go hunting quite a bit, and he would let me shoot guns, even though I was still a tiny kid. I remember one day we were hanging out, hunting, and my dad let me fire a 12 gauge shotgun. I fired, and the kickback from the shotgun knocked me on my ass, and I started crying. My mom was pissed off when she found out. Why in the hell did you let him shoot a shotgun? She yelled at my dad. But I got into plenty of trouble on my own. I was kind of a smartass, even at a young age. There was the day that I almost set the backyard on fire. A bunch of cut grass had dried and had been piling up for a few weeks. I stacked up all the grass and started flicking lit matches at it. The pile caught fire just about the time my mom came home. She yelled at me and gave me the wait until your father gets home speech. My dad came home and I got a good ass whooping. Sometimes it seemed like we got hit a lot, but my parents never really beat us. We would get a whipping if we got out of line, but if it was never anything serious, it was more of a serious scolding than anything else. I remember my mom slapping me in the head a couple of times when I was younger. While I'm not in favor of physical abuse of any kind, I do believe that a good whipping once in a while helps keep a kid in line. So I believe my parents were right in what they were doing. I started preschool at age 5 at Eder Elementary, which was at the intersection of Pacific Coast Highway and Magnolia in Huntington Beach. My parents were kind of into the hippie thing back then, so haircuts were not a big priority. Consequently, I had hair down to my ass on that first day of school. The other kids jumped on that and began making fun of me. They would say things like, there was a little girl, and his name was Jacob. I remember coming home crying and telling my mom. She said, well, I guess we'll just have to cut your hair. So they did, and I ended up with a mohawk. That worked out pretty well for the weekend. But by the time I went back to school the next week, my head was completely shaved. And then I was teased for being bald. Kids can be pretty cruel, even at that young age, but for the most part, I got along pretty well with everyone. I was a leader in school, probably due to a combination of my size and attitude. I wasn't afraid of anything, and if I told somebody to do something, they usually did it. Sometimes there would be problems with the other kids. One day I was playing on the playground slide, and one of the kids called my mom a bitch. What did you say? I remember saying. I said, your mom is a bitch, he answered. Well, I got real mad and pushed the kid off the swing he was on and made him cry. I got in trouble for that. The teacher wanted to know what happened, but I wouldn't tell on the guy. There was a code, even at that young age, that you did not snitch on anybody. I told the teacher that he was talking about my mom, but I wouldn't tell anybody what he said. My mom got called to the school to pick me up, and she wanted to know what happened. I said, "This guy called you a fucking bitch." She told me to watch my mouth. I cussed a lot back then, and the teachers would always wash my mouth out with soap. Then there were the drugs. My parents smoked pot. It was part of that 70s hippie thing that was going on at the time. My dad and mom grew up in the 60s, and they always used drugs. They were real stoners. In fact, there was an issue of Time magazine in the 1970s that covered this big outdoor California rock festival called the US Festival. And if you look real closely at one of the pictures, you can see my dad with his big afro, and he sure looked like he was having a good time. They would smoke with their friends at parties and after work. It wasn't an addiction so much as a lifestyle. It wasn't hurting their day to day lives. Dad would always get high, but he was able to go off to work each day and do his job. Mom was always good about getting us up and making sure our clothes were clean, we were fed, and our needs were taken care of. We would always see them smoking. It didn't mean a whole lot to me at the time. It was just something my parents and their friends did, and it always seemed to make them mellow. Joyce Robles. Sam and I were hippies, stone hippies. Marijuana was a very big part of our lifestyle. It was all about the herb. The kids had things to do, so they weren't sitting around watching us smoke all day. When Tito was real young, a couple of years old, he was not aware of our lifestyle. But when he got a little older, he knew it was a natural thing in the home. He was a very wise boy. The reason my parents smoking pot was not a big deal to me was because my brothers used to smoke pot, and they turned me on to it when I was 5 years old. Getting high at age 5 was not so great. I would remember getting head spins that would knock me over, and I would have those bad headaches afterwards. It sucked. It just didn't feel good. I also started drinking beer at age 5. Joyce Robles. I wasn't aware that Tito was doing drugs and drinking that young. If I had known, I would have done something about it. My parents weren't concerned because they didn't know we were doing it. They never knew about it at all. We always got away with it. Though I never thought about it in those terms, maybe it was because I was so young. I just felt like they were doing their thing and I was doing mine. Everybody was getting high and loaded. It was a carefree life. End of chapter 1.